try to do is to tell you a bit about the history of what happened to the Jewish people between the two world wars and during the Second World War. And to do that particularly by telling you about a friend of mine, because a lot of a lecture of facts and figures can be a bit boring, but when you can identify to one person, they become hopefully more real to you. And this was a very, very dear old friend of mine called Hillel Pokrzwya. The name Pokrzywa in Polish means stinging nettle. So you know the stinging nettle. So the Jews were called stinging nettle. You know, just you're a nuisance to us kind of thing. And this dear old friend of mine, Hillel Pokrzwya, was born into a very traditional Jewish family, ultra-Orthodox religious, in the city of Łódź in Poland. It was a huge centre of the textile industry, and most of the Jews there were employed in tailoring. And as a boy, Hillel was sent to learn, as every Jewish boy was, to learn a trade, and he became a ladies' tailor, and a very, very good one. But when he was growing up there, he found that, you know, there was like two communities. We know a bit about that in this country, don't we? And very often, at Easter especially, when feelings would run very high, they used to spread a rumour that's known as the blood libel, that the Jews, to make the bread for Passover, would steal a Christian child from its cradle and kill the child and use the blood to mix the dough to make the matzah. Now, anybody who knows anything about the Jewish food laws understands immediately that has to be a lie, because they're not allowed to eat any kind of blood. They can't eat animal blood. You know, when the Jewish woman goes to the butcher, she can only buy meat from the hind quarter, never from the, from the forequarter. Got the wrong way around there. From the forequarter, never from the hind quarter. And when she gets her bit of meat home, she has to soak it in water for an hour, and then in salt for half an hour, to take out every drop of blood from the meat. And if after doing all that she cuts it in two and exposes another surface, she has to soak it and do it up to kosher it all over again. So they can't use blood. But you know, especially in Poland and in Russia, I suppose East Europe in general, people were very fond of making soup with beetroot that they called borscht. So you can just imagine when they would be having their beetroot soup, you know, and the old Jewish guy would be sitting in his cabin eating his soup, and it'd be running down his big white beard, and the peasants would come and look in the window. They'd say, they're drinking blood, look at them, because they're just like that. And sometimes even when people had borrowed money from the Jews that they didn't want to pay back, they would stir up all these things, particularly around Easter, and they'd say, look, they're drinking the blood. Sometimes they even stole children away themselves and killed them to get the Jews blamed. And so there were often pogroms like what happened in House 13. And very often, Hillel used to tell me that the Cossack soldiers would come riding down the village street, and they'd put out their sabres, and when the Jews were running for shelter, they would just lop off their head, and the heads would go rolling down the street. And he would see this kind of thing happening, and I said to him, well, how did you react? And he said, well, I reacted by walking past their church. And of course in Poland it was a Catholic church. And when I saw the cross, I'd look around and see if anybody was looking, and then I would spit on it. And of course somebody seeing the Jew spitting on the cross, that was another insult, and caused more and more and more trouble. So they grew up in very poor circumstances indeed. He was only a boy when his father died, and his mother remarried, but he didn't get on with the stepfather, as often happens, and things were quite difficult, so he went to live with an uncle, and they were just hand-to-mouth existence. His uncle was a porter who had a horse and cart and would shift stuff around for people, and so on. When he was just 18 years old, he received the call-up papers to the Russian army. At that time, that part of Poland was part of the Russian Empire, and he got his call up to go to serve in the Russian army. At that period in history, every Jewish male in the whole empire was considered to be the personal property of the Tsar. Okay? He had to go to serve. Usually when they needed to make up the numbers, they would take boys even as young as 12 years old into the army, and they'd give them a big pair of boots and a full-size uniform and make them serve until they were 50 years old, and they received no wages for their service in the army, just the bare existence. And to make sure they were really fit to serve in the army of Holy Mother Russia, the first thing they did was march them all down to the river and forcibly baptize them and say, now you're Christians. And to make sure they'd really done it, they'd be marched back to the barracks and given a good feed of pork for their lunch, to make really sure, you know, that you're no longer a Jew, now you're fit to serve in the army of Mother Russia. So Hillel said, why should I go to serve in the army of a country that doesn't love my people? I'm not going. So he decided to escape. And with another friend of his, they made a plan to get across the border into Germany and run away. They bribed the man to take them. They paid the man some money, but they were quite clever, you know, the Jewish cop, as we talk about, it's not so slow. So they took the money and they cut it in two, and they gave the man half the notes, and they said, whenever you come back and my brother-in-law gets the word that I've got safely away, he'll give you the other half. He'll have the money. Wasn't that smart?
That was smart.
I tell you, we wouldn't have thought of that, but he did. They put him in there's a kind of a long cart in Poland called a druszka, and they put him in the bottom of this cart with sloping sides, a pile of hay on top, and he lay there, and when they came to the border, the German officers got up onto the cart with their muskets in those days and their bayonets, and they began to poke the straw to see was there any pigs or anything hidden in the straw to be smuggled across the border, and he's lying in there. But again, he was smart, because when he lay in the bottom of this cart with the sloping sides, he got them to put an old wooden door on top of him, and so when the bayonets came through the straw, they began to hit. They thought it was the bottom of the cart they were hitting, and he got across safe. He had an aunt who lived in Berlin, so he came to her and he said to her, I'm running away, and can I stay here? And she said, all right, you can stay here. So he was staying with her. The first night, when he's there in the house, the police arrived. They weren't looking for him, but they were looking for his uncle by marriage, who was a well-known burglar. He'd done a job. The police were on his trail. They came looking for him, but they didn't find him. They found this young Hillel, who's an illegal, without any passport, without any documents. He's carted off to the famous Moabit prison in Berlin, and he's locked up there for 3 months. And then they release him and they tell him, go back to Poland. But he didn't want to go, so he went back to his aunt's. He had his overcoat there, still in the house, and he'd sewed into the shoulder pads some money, you know, for his journey. But when he came back and got his overcoat, the pockets had been opened and the money was all gone. He was robbed by his own auntie, can you imagine? And the poor critter, he's left destitute. He moves to another address. He is not allowed to stay there in Germany, so he walks mostly at night. He comes to Belgium. They won't let him stay there because he's got no passport, so he keeps on walking. And he walks all the way to Paris. Can you imagine trudging along at night, sleeping in barns? What an existence for a teenage lad. And he gets to Paris, and for 1 week he's living in the metro, in the underground, because he's nowhere to go, and he's eating out of the rubbish bins, and life is really terrible. And then one day he sees a man in front of him walking, and he says, I know that man. He's from Łódź. And he recognized the man's peculiar walk, and he rushes up to him and says, this is like a miracle to find you among all the people in Paris. And he says, maybe my luck has changed, you know, to use that expression. And so the guy takes him home, gives him a bath, lets him stay there. He gets him a job working as a tailor. And he's there working away, everything's going good now. And one night he decides to go out to the cinema. On the way home he stops for a cup of coffee. And when he's sitting in the coffee shop, the police come. Lots of people were travelling around in those days between the two world wars. It was a very volatile time. And they come. Passport, documents, ID. He's got nothing. So he's arrested again. And he's locked up in Paris for another 3 months in jail for being an illegal immigrant. And he's released. He moves to another place. He stays on in Paris, although they've told him to go back, because he doesn't want to go back. If he goes back, he'll be treated as a deserter. So he stays on in Paris, and he's got this job. And in those days, very often the tailor used to sit in the shop window, you know, doing the sewing to show how good was the tailoring. And he's sitting there sewing, when suddenly he sees coming down the street the policeman who had arrested him. And he thinks, oh, I'm in trouble if he sees me. So he jumps up, takes his coat, puts it on, and again, he tries to get away, but he's apprehended once more, and he's back inside another time. And this time when they let him out, they said to him, look, we've had so much trouble with you. Either you go back to Poland, where you belong, or else you can volunteer to become a soldier in the French Foreign Legion. Now, you've all heard of the Foreign Legion, haven't you? One of the toughest outfits in the world. And he says, what choice have I got? I don't want to go back there to the Russian army. I ran away not to go to the army. And here, so he ends up sent to Marseille, to the special fort there where they train the new recruits for the Legion. And he does 6 weeks training. Now, he's a religious, ultra-Orthodox Jewish boy with a black outfit, you know, and long curls hanging down here at his ears, and the whole works, and suddenly he's in the Foreign Legion with people from all over the world, and he discovers he's gone from the frying pan into the fire. The first morning he gets the call to wake up, and they tell him, here's your basic training, take that pack, put it on your back, you go out, you run 35 miles. When you come back, if you come back, you get your breakfast. And that's just basic training for 6 weeks. And then he's put on a ship called the City Belle Abbess and shipped across to North Africa, where the French are fighting the Berbers in the Atlas Mountains. And he ends up there as a soldier in the Foreign Legion fighting the Berber tribesmen. He told me many stories of those days. Some of them were a bit blood-curdling, you know, because they were struggling with those Berbers, and life was very, very difficult. Sometimes they'd be camped somewhere when they were out in the hills, and they would, a couple of guys put out, you know, to keep the picket line and watch, and the others would be in the camp. And one night they all decided, you know, let's put our soup ration together. So they all chipped in their soup ration in the big pot and made one big pot of soup for them to share. And 2 Italian guys were out keeping the perimeter. And eventually they said, right boys, you could come in and have your soup. But they'd killed 2 tribesmen earlier that day. And one of the things that the Legion did was cut the heads off the people that they'd killed. So they'd cut off these 2 heads. They poured out the soup for the 2 Italians. And then afterwards they put the heads into the soup pot. And the 2 Italians who weren't very popular were sitting eating up their soup, you know, and then somebody hooked in the pot and said, oh, look what the... And the Italians were convinced they made the soup out of the human heads, and were rather badly sick and so on. During that time, Hillel, we call him Uncle Henry because it was easier for us to say. Uncle Henry, he fell in with a girl, as sometimes happens. And they took a turn for the better, because one day the commander came and said, anybody here a tailor? And he says, I'm a tailor. We need a tailor. The uniforms are getting very tatty. We need somebody to mend them. From now on you won't go out on patrol. You'll stay and work in the tailor shop and fix the uniform. So that was a bit better for him. And during that time we met this girl, and she turned out to be a Catholic. But he said, I don't care what she is. I don't care whether she's black, or whether she's Catholic, or what she is, because there's no God anyway. For if there was any God, he would never have treated me so badly. Look how badly I've been treated. Look what I've suffered all my life. So I don't care what she is, I'm going to marry her. And he decided to get married to this girl. And her mother wasn't too happy about the fact that she was going to marry a Jew. But what to do? One night, when her mother went to the well to draw water, an old guy turned up. And he was an old preacher from the Plymouth Brethren. And he was wandering through the Sahara Desert preaching the gospel. And he stopped at the well that night and he began to preach. And the prospective mother-in-law got converted. And as soon as she did, she said, you know what, I wish you'd go and talk to my son-in-law to be, because this fellow that my daughter's going to marry, he's a Jew. And the old preacher started to cry. And she said, what's wrong? He said, I also am a Jew. He was a Jewish believer in Jesus Christ. And he was astonished. And so he started, and for the next 2 years, every week, he went to visit Uncle Henry in the tailor's shop. And he would stand there and try to preach to him. And Henry didn't want to listen. He's a Jew, and he's, by this time, a secular Jew. He doesn't care about God at all. He's a Jew by ethnic origin, and he doesn't care about anything. Finally, one day, it's so hot there in the desert, and he's really feeling miserable. And he says, what do you want from me? You come here every week and you talk to me, and what do you want me to do? He says, I want you to believe. All right, I believe. But he didn't really mean it, you know, he only said it. But the old guy thought he did, and he got down on his knees in the shop and started to thank God that this son of Abraham had come home to the Messiah. And then Henry felt so embarrassed, and he thought, I can't tell him now. He's so excited and he's so happy. I can't tell him I didn't really mean it. So for another 2 years, he went to the meetings every Sunday. And he sat in the meetings, and when they were singing, every time they sang a hymn that mentioned the name of Jesus, he would hold the book up like this, so they wouldn't see that he wasn't singing, because he couldn't bear to mention the name of Jesus. And after that, a couple of years had gone by. One day, the old man, his name was Mr. Block. Mr. Block came in and he says, Henry, how would you like to go to Switzerland for a week's holiday? No, it's going to be a Bible conference. And you could come. No, I don't want to go. Look, it'll be nice and cool up in the mountains, and snow, and you'll be away from the heat in the desert, and it'll be free. Free. It's Jewish, well, you can't resist that. Okay, so off he goes to Switzerland. And when he arrives there, among this group of people, he finds out that they're all lovely believers. And when he'd be walking around the site of the conference centre, and people would meet him, they would say to him, are you the Jew? We love the Jews. Our Saviour is Jewish. And they'd throw their arms around him, and this would go on. And he began to think, all my life I've suffered so much, and people hated me, and I was persecuted, and now these people are so nice to me. What they're saying must be the truth, because this love, it couldn't be from man, it must be from God. And if it's from God, then it's the truth, and if it's the truth, I better believe it. So finally, on the last day of the conference, he went to the front and he confessed that he'd only been pretending, but now he'd come to real faith in Jesus Christ. And he opened his own retailing business there in Morocco, and did quite well at it. And then eventually he joined the mission to serve as a missionary to the Jews, and spent all the rest of his life until he was 96 years old preaching the gospel to his own people. And he used to say to me, no road too long, no hill too steep, no difficulty too great to go to speak to one single Jewish person and tell them about the Messiah. And he and I, of course he was an old man and I was only a young fellow, but anyway, he and I used to work together, and we travelled together in places like Spain and France. He lived in Paris and down into Morocco, across North Africa, on the Rock of Gibraltar, and places like that. We often went travelling together, sharing the gospel with Jewish people. And one day we're driving along in Morocco and Tangier, and he says to me, Ronnie, there's one thing I'd love to do before I die. What's that? I'd love to go back to where I was born, to see if I could find anybody there from my family, to check, you know, is there any Pokrzywas left? Is there anything remaining? And I said, well, why don't you go? Oh, I can't go there. He said, it's communist. They might take me. I ran away without permission. Ah, no, after all these years, sure, you're a French citizen. You've got a French passport. You could go. Oh, no. I tell you what, if you want to go, I'll go with you. Let's go together. So we made a plan to go together. It was still the Soviet Union. And we met up in Paris. And when we met up in Paris, he was Jewish, you understand? He says to me, Ronnie, there's 2 kinds of seats on the train. We're going to take the train from Paris to Warsaw. There's 2 kinds of seats on the train. Oh yeah? Yeah, there's hard seats and there's soft seats. But the soft seats cost £5 more. So we're travelling in the hard seats. Save the fiver. Okay, I didn't know then that the railway journey was 25 hours. And I'll tell you what, after 5 or 6 I'd have paid more than a fiver for a soft seat. And we travelled together on that train. And we came, of course, to Berlin. And in that time Berlin was divided. So we came to all the checkpoints. And we drove in, and there was barbed wire everywhere, and they got on with the dogs and searched and all the rest of it through the eastern part, and then West Berlin, and then back into East Germany, and so on. And eventually we came to Warsaw. I remember him saying to me, what are you going to do about the money? Oh, he says, I changed mine at the Polish Bank in London. They told me I had to change £12 per day for every day I would be in the country. So I got all these Polish zloty. And I had to rent the car and pay for it in London. And I had to buy the petrol with coupons before. So I've got these coupons for exchanging for petrol. It was a rip-off, you know, if you exchanged a coupon for 20 gallons, and you should only hold 10, too bad you didn't get any refund, you just lost it. So he says, I'm not going to do that, I change mine in the black market. And I said, that's a bit risky, you know, well, I'm going to do it. So he changed his money in the black market. And then we've discovered there's nothing to spend it on. The shops were empty in Poland in those days. There was no food to be had. And people we stayed with had difficulty feeding us. And every day, nothing to buy. And he said, what am I going to do? I've got this money and I've no receipts for it. So and he starts to worry about the money. One Sunday morning I'm speaking at the Baptist church in Warsaw, and after the service I told them why I was there and who I was with. Somebody came up to me and they gave me some money and said, that's for your old friend, to help him. So on the way back I said, Henry, I've got bad news for you. He says, what's the bad news? You've been given some more money here. Because now he's got more. And he worried so much until the last night. He says, there's only one thing I can do. I'll have to give it away. And he had to go out in the street and give it away. And it broke his Jewish heart to give the money away like that. And so on. We came to the city where he was born and brought up, to Lodz, Łódź, to give his right name. We found the house where he was born. We went to the door and knocked the door and asked the lady to let us see the apartment. She said no Jews allowed. So we weren't allowed in. But anyway, we saw it, and as we came down the stairs, he said to me, you know, we used to play there in that courtyard in the back as children, and it seems to me like all my life is passing in front of my eyes at this moment. And then he said this very interesting thing to me, man, and something well worth thinking about. He said, I thought God was dealing with me so harshly, and I blamed God. But afterwards I understood, if I stayed in Germany, I'd be gone. If I'd even got staying in Belgium, they'd have got me there. Even if I'd been able to stay in Paris, I'd be dead like all the rest of my family. in the Holocaust. But he said, you know what God did? He put me in North Africa in the Sahara Desert where Hitler couldn't reach me. And what I thought was God treating me so badly was actually the Almighty preserving my life. Sometimes God has bigger plans than we can see. In fact, He always has bigger plans than you and I can see right now. And you know what we found? We church there, we Pentecostal church in Łódź, and we arrived to stay with the pastor, and we're just moving in. The pastor was away, but his wife says, if you don't mind staying here, you can sleep on the floor in the living room. Oh, that'll do all right. And so she puts down a mattress for us to lie on at night, and we're just unpacking a few of our things when he says to me, there's a meeting tonight and you're speaking. Oh, really? Yes, for the youth, and you're younger than me, so you go and take it. So I went, and the pastor's daughter and her fiance, who was a doctor, were there, and I'm chatting to them, and they said, what are you doing tomorrow? Maybe we can take you somewhere. And I said, well, tomorrow I'm going to look for an office. I don't know what you call it here in this country, but in our country it's the registrar for births, deaths and marriages. What do you want to go there for? I want to look for his birth certificate, because he never saw it. And the girl says, oh well, that's not a problem, because that's where I work. I can get it for you. Go you with him in the morning to the synagogue. And he and I went to the service in the synagogue that morning. They were short of a man, so they called him in. Now they've got 9, but they have to have 10 to pray. So they're talking and they're looking at me and they're examining my nose and saying, you Jewish? And he says, he belongs to the God of Abraham, of Isaac and of Jacob. Yes, but is he Jewish? No, I said, I'm not Jewish. Look at me, I'm a Gentile. No good. So they phone out and they get a wee handicapped man to come in to make up the number, pay him a few zlotys to come to attend the prayers, and they're able to have the service. And at the end, the girl arrives with his birth certificate and his father's death certificate that she got. And on the way back in the car, I said to him, Henry, look what I've got for you this time. And he looks, wow, and he began to cry. You ever see an old man in his 80s crying? He says, there's my father's signature. I never saw it before. And we went to the cemetery and we visited the grave of his father, and he said, you see on that tombstone, I knew that the day after I was going to leave, my mother would come to the grave to visit the grave. So I went and I wrote with chalk a message on the tombstone to say I've left, and that was the last contact he ever had with his mother. Because when he tried to write home, first he was afraid. When she'd hear become a believer, she'd be so angry. When he eventually wrote, it was too late. Because his mother, his brother, his sister Rachel Leah Zlotnik, and her husband and his nephews and nieces all went to the concentration camp, and all were gassed and burned in Auschwitz without even any memorial to mark their grave. When we were there, I said to him one day, Henry, let's go to the former concentration camp. And so we went. And I'll never forget those days, man. You see, right? It was my first visit to that awful place. It wasn't like it is today. Today it's like a tourist attraction with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people every day going. But then it was just lying as it was at the end of the war. And not many people ever went to visit. There were notices around that said, here Polish patriots lost their lives to the German fascists. But it never said any Jews died there. There was no such a thing in those communist days that they would say Jewish people were exterminated at that place. But I remember when we drove up and we came to the car park outside, we got out and we walked forward and we came to the entrance gate. And in German it said over the gate, as it still does, it's been replaced, not with the original because the original one was taken away and cut up, but it says Arbeit macht frei. Work makes free. And all those people arriving there, that's what they were told. This is going to be a work camp, and you're coming here, and labour will make you free. And just inside the gate, they always had an orchestra of Jewish prisoners playing classical music to make the people feel calm. You know, everything is going to be wonderful here, beautiful music, and everything is going to be great. But of course, they were going to their death. That day, as he and I walked up to that entrance together, he stopped. I'm keep one eye at a time here because I don't want to keep it too long. But he stopped and he touched my arm and he said to me, Ronnie, I cannot go further. I cannot enter this gate. I feel sick. And he stopped and he said to me, my lovely sister, all my family, oh, every boy I went to school with, every single boy is dead. All killed there. I can't enter that place. And I said, well, it may seem strange to you, but I have the opposite feeling. I feel I have to enter. So he went and sat in the car that we'd rented, an old Polski Fiat, and he sat for the rest of the day in the car with his memories, and I went alone to walk around a cold, wet, winter day, hardly anybody about the whole site, and I just roamed about on my own. It was a very deeply moving and unforgettable experience. I've been there many times since, but I'll never forget that first visit to that horrible place. And going in to sit in the quietness, alone, no crowds, nobody else pushing, just sitting there myself, sitting in the remains of crematorium number 4, and most of those installations were blown up by the Germans, so they're only ruins. And I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, how could such a thing happen? At least, nobody knows for sure, but at least 1.3 million people died in Auschwitz, Birkenau, in the concentration camps. The records were kept reasonably well, but many who died from starvation weren't recorded, many who died from disease weren't recorded, so nobody knows the exact figure. But what's the difference, you know, 1 million, 2 million, it's multitudes of people would be like lining up everybody in Northern Ireland and gassing the whole lot of us, could you imagine? And I sat there saying, where was God when all this happened? You know, all the actual thoughts. How come this could happen? And why did the Allies not come and bomb the railway line and stop the trains coming in? And why? All the things. And then as I started thinking about it, I thought, you know what? The Bible tells us that in the end time, the state of Israel would come back into being. The Jewish people would return. And that time was approaching. And I've come to believe that in the pit of hell, the devil knew that. And all the demons of darkness were let loose. Because if you can annihilate the Jews, God can't fulfill his word. I don't think it makes any sense to me. And so they did everything they could to wipe them out. Massacred. Who could actually comprehend such a thing? That the most educated nation in Europe, the most sophisticated, the most scientifically and technologically advanced people could do such a terrible thing. And that there was hardly a dissenting voice raised. One or two notable exceptions like Dietrich Bonhoeffer, but hardly anybody, even the churches were silent. None of them put the swastika flag in the church. And it wasn't just one wee man with a moustache who was responsible. And it wasn't just the henchmen who were around him. It was the whole nation. That the only explanation is that they were demonized. When you listen to him, even you can't understand the language, you listen to him speaking, there was a power and a charisma in his speech that was not human, that influenced the masses, and they shouted at their great rallies in Munich and other places, you know, Sieg Heil, Sieg Heil. And he told them from the beginning, from 1933, we're going to get rid of the Jews. And this is going to be the solution to our problem. we're going to exterminate them. At the great conference at Wannsee, just outside Berlin, in a beautiful leafy suburb where millionaires live today, on the bank of a lake, there's a lovely mansion. And one day he gathered them all there in that mansion to decide on the final solution, what they would do to the Jew. And they sat there, and the head of the civil service said, I can organise people to do this. And the head of German Railways said, I can organise the timetables for the trains to take them away. And another said, I can do this. And another said, I can do that. And another says, I can organise the Cyclone B for gassing them. And they all chipped in with their bit, sitting around the table. The table's still there, man, on one side. And the pictures are behind every seat, you know, of all the people who sat just like this. And everybody said, I could do this to exterminate the Jews. And we estimate that altogether about 6 million people lost their lives. And to sit there that day was so deeply, deeply moving. Especially thinking about my old friend out in the car. And as I sat there, I said, here, hell did its worst to annihilate the Jewish people, but they didn't succeed. Because not only did Jewish people survive, but they're back in their own country, and they're back in their own city of Jerusalem, and they've returned after an exile of 2,500 years, and their language is spoken, the language of the Bible is spoken in the streets of Tel Aviv and Jerusalem once again. And so I did something that I don't usually do. I'm not too given to writing graffiti on walls, but I did that day in Auschwitz. I got a bit of angle iron and I scraped into the plaster on the whole wall. Star of David, and in the middle I wrote 2 words in Hebrew. I wrote, Am Israel Chai. The people of Israel are alive. Is it anyone